Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
I need a refill. I need a new mind. I need to set my prejudice aside. I need a new soul. I need a heartbreak. I need to see the tragedies abate. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a new mind. I need to set my prejudice aside. I need a new soul. I need a heartbreak. I need to see the tragedies abate. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a reform. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a reform.
Good morning, Crosspointe family. This is Jonathan. Really good to be able to gather with you today, even in this online environment. I'm just reminded all the time of how grateful I am that who we are as a church hasn't changed, and the vision of who we are as a church hasn't changed. And the strategy has had to shift a little bit during the pandemic, but we're still rolling and still rolling at full speed. And I'm so grateful for the ways that we can continue to learn together and grow together, that we can find ways to encourage and challenge one another, ways that we can participate in loving and caring for one another and loving and caring for people in our city and our world. And it's a beautiful thing we get to do together. And it's such an honor to get to do that with you. If you're new around here, or maybe you're not new around here, but you just need a refresher about some different ways to get connected, I want to remind you that you can go to crosspoint.org/enews. We provide weekly updates about different ways that you can gather online with our community, different notices, different things that are going on so that you can stay connected to what's happening at Crosspointe. Also, there's a way to sign up there. If you have a middle school or high school student, they have their own updates and their own weekly newsletters that go out. And so I want to encourage you that you can go to crosspoint.org/enews and sign up for any of that. It'll help you stay connected and aware of what's going on. We're also trying something new today called these online lobbies. Maybe some of you participated in one at 9:30 just before service started. But immediately following service today, we're going to open up another one. And we're just trying to create an environment that is similar to what we used to have on campus when we would bump into one another, maybe before service or after service in the lobby, and we could have time for a quick conversation. We could maybe meet some new people. And so we're going to just try as an experiment and see how it goes. And so in this description on this YouTube post, you'll find Zoom links that you can go and click on and get connected to that online lobby. They're also in the email that we sent out yesterday. If you got that direct links email, you can go there and find, just something to click on, a Zoom link there, and you can be a part of that. There's ways that we can break it down into smaller groups and smaller conversations. And so we're going to try that. We're going to experiment with it, see how it goes. Hope that you give that a shot if getting connected with some more people at Crosspointe sounds appealing to you. So also want to let you know that summer groups are coming up. Summer groups are a great way to get connected. They're going to meet 6 times throughout the summer. And summer groups are just going to have some discussions about some books, about some different ideas. Different summer groups are talking about some different curriculum and all those different kinds of things. There's all over the map. And if you're interested in saying, you know what, I think it would be a good discipline for me to put into my summer rhythm, that I get connected with some people and I can meet some new people, and I can talk about some other things that's not only the news feeding into me or just what I see on the internet or just what I see on social media, that I can have some people to process and talk about stuff with. If that sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you that you go to crosspoint.org/summer-groups. You can see all the different conversations that we're going to be having in summer groups, some of the different studies and books that we'll be looking at and talking about together. And so I'd encourage you to go check that out, sign up, and get connected. A couple days ago, I got a phone call from the director of the YMCA, Brad Emery, and it's been so great partnering with him and with the Northwest Cary Y in so many different ways. But he wanted to call to specifically for me to pass on to all of you just how grateful he and the YMCA are for all that Crosspointe has been able to do for Camp Hope, their camp for kids of essential workers, and not only for all the kids, but also for the staff of the YMCA who's been serving in that capacity. And one of the things he said that stood out was just that he goes, you guys ended up filling gaps for us that we didn't even know existed and that we didn't even know we really needed. But it has brought so much joy and love to the kids and to our staff. And so thank you to all of you at Crosspointe. And so I just wanted to pass that on to you because I'm, again, so proud to be able to do what we do all together and find ways to love and serve people in our city. And we believe with all of our hearts that we can continue to do more and more good when we leverage our generosity together than any of us can do just on our own individually. And so we continue to see that in the hundreds of gift cards that went out this last week to students, and to see those students sharing other gift cards with other students and peers throughout the community. And we've heard so many really good and beautiful stories of that coming back to us. And also just the rent that we've been able to pay and the car payments and the utility payments, counseling, all sorts of different ways that we've been able to help people during this really difficult time. It's because of all of you who continue to contribute to who we are. And so if you want to continue to do that and to participate financially, you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute. There's all sorts of ways that you can find there where to mail checks. You can find out information about PayPal or how to transfer stocks or credit cards, debit cards, all that kind of stuff. Or you can always text the word CrosspointeNC to the number 77977. It'll send you a link, and with one click, you can contribute however you want to. It's very, very safe, very secure. But just thank you. Thank you for all of you who continue to fund who we are together and what we're doing together, because it just continues to make a real tangible difference in the holistic spectrum of people's lives. Two other things I want to touch base on. One is that we started a project this last week that we're calling Capture Gratitude. And we want to put this discipline into our lives where we're capturing gratitude. So our hope is that throughout a day, throughout a week, that you would take out your smartphone when you see something that you are grateful for or that symbolizes something that you're grateful for, you'll take a picture of it and then you'll email it to capturegratitude@crosspoint.org, or you'll post it on social media and hashtag it, #capturegratitude. And what we want to do is, again, we want to put all these together in an art project that can serve as a reminder for all of us in the midst of pandemic world and all that we're living in, that there's a lot to be grateful for. And so I hope that you'll participate in that and capture lots of pictures, as many as you want, and send them in. And if we do this all together, I think it'll be something really good and beautiful. But as many things as there are to be grateful for, it's also very true that there's a lot of things to grieve. And this has been a especially hard week. It's already hard, right? In the middle of pandemic, middle of quarantine. But this week as a nation, there's just been a lot of pain, and there's a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of anger and confusion. And we want to take some time as a church to be able to pause and to grieve that, and to collectively let ourselves feel that. And so here for the next few minutes, I hope that you'll take some time and you'll let yourselves just feel what we need to feel. And as we figure out continually what it looks like to be people of the good news, people of the resurrection.
And now from this place of stillness and presence, centeredness, openness, and trust in the living God who's in us and around us. From this place, I want to invite us into an experience of a song. This song is powerful, it's prophetic, it's beautiful, it's tragic, it's provocative. It will stir up emotions and different emotions and a different mixture of emotions for our community, depending on who we are and where we're coming from. But it's good. That's why we're in community. We'll stir up conversations that we need to have and we can have in this community of love. The prophets have always spoken to the church from the margins. They've always called us on our complicity with systems of power and injustice. They've always called us on our inability or unwillingness to live out the gospel, even before it was called the gospel. To live out justice and love and taking care of the vulnerable and the marginalized. When I heard this song a year ago, I had to get up, I had to leave the room, I had to leave the building at the office, and I had to cry. And there's such a temptation to look away, but the song is asking us to listen, to see. And the effect that this song has had on me over the past year has not gone away. And it has, as much as it wrecked me, it also inspired me with, it fanned into flame compassion and an unwillingness to look away any longer. It's caused me to educate myself more and more. It's caused me to actually act in moments of injustice and to call out white supremacy where I see it. And we'll get to all that, to steps and what we as white people can do. But for right now, it's important just to listen to the voices of our brothers and sisters, to decenter the white experience and to amplify the experience of people of color, our brothers and sisters that live with this grief and this fear every day. Can't turn it off. Can't move on with the news cycle and the social media cycle. So from this place that we're in, of stillness and trust, let's trust that God is leading us to see, and that as our hearts are broken, it's okay. It's what needs to happen. And let's allow the voices from the margins to speak, and let's listen. Let's not allow our defenses to short circuit this experience. Let's listen. Would you pray with me? God, we grieve the unjust killing of George Floyd this past week. We mourn with his family in their loss. We hear, we amplify, and we echo the voices of all of our brothers and sisters of color who continue to suffer cruelty and injustice. And God, as the one tasked to respond in this moment to this song that we've just experienced and the truth that it highlights and brings back in front of us, I think it's best to borrow the prayer of Brittany Spencer of Common Hymnal. So we pray, God, for those of us that are hurting, for those of us that feel tired every time we hear another name of a person treated unjustly, for those of us that are seeking the truth, for those of us that are confused, for those of us fighting apathy, for those of us yet again at a loss for words, for those of us that are new to these realities, to the plight of the oppressed, for those of us who are fighting the narratives that were given to us by our communities, by the people around us, for those of us hurting, for those of us looking for you in the midst of pain, oppression, and trauma. God, I ask that you be with us all. Be with us, God. Wherever we are, I ask that you would meet us. In Jesus' name, amen.
This week has been really hard. We are still in a global pandemic, and now across our screens we see images of more abuse of our Black siblings. And sometimes I'm not sure how to feel. Videos like the one that we saw today bring me to my knees. But my grief is nothing like that felt by the mothers who continue to lose their sons and daughters. I have been doing personal equity work for a while, engaging in education and conversations about racism and equality. And I often get asked questions like, why do we keep studying racism? Why do we keep having these conversations? Why can't we move forward? Why do we have to keep bringing up the past? Let's move on. And these are really important things to wrestle with. And as a white woman, I can only share from my perspective. I'm the oldest of 4 children. My dad was a Southern Baptist minister. Most of my childhood was spent way below the poverty line. Many times it was only through the kindness of other people that we had food on our table. Our pantry was often empty. Many times I didn't play sports or join clubs at my public school because we couldn't afford the uniforms or whatever other costs were involved. We shopped at Goodwill. I borrowed my prom dresses. We didn't have health insurance. I didn't go to the dentist until I was in my adult years. I paid for college completely by myself. I'm also a female in a male-dominated profession. Many of you probably have much more difficult stories than my own. And I don't tell you that to feel sorry for me. I tell you that because in spite of all of that, I've come to realize that I have always been privileged. I have never feared for my life because of the color of my skin. My motives for shopping in the store have never been questioned. I can get angry, and although people might chalk it up to an issue of my gender, they would never say that it had to do with the color of my skin. I am not afraid when I see flashing blue lights in my rearview mirror. I don't worry that my children will not be treated fairly in their classrooms. I will not fear for the life of my son when he sits behind the wheel of a car, other than for maybe his lack of driving skills. These are just a few of the things that I don't have to think about because of this color of my skin. And although the roots of my heritage run deeply in the American South, until recently, the last few years, I've never really thought of myself as racist. I have many friends of color. There are people of color in my own family. I try to treat everyone the same. The fight for equity and racial reconciliations is something I've been doing for over 10 years now. And of course, the historical context that's led to the disparities of race in our country right now, they're not technically my fault. They're not the fault of my children. The history is not the fault of police officers. History is not the fault of George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor. But not using my privilege to pursue a world where people do not fear for their lives because of the color of their skin is my fault. It is the responsibility of those who hold the power. And as insignificant we may feel at times, it is white Americans who hold the power in our nation. We all hold some sort of power. We all have influence somewhere. And before you shut me off, I want to say that admitting that our nation has a deeply rooted problem with racism is not a universal statement against our country's police officers or against our servicemen and women. It is not a call to burn our flag. Agreeing that Black lives matter is not admitting that other lives do not matter. It is a way of loving our neighbor and engaging in corporate grief. It is choosing to acknowledge the mother whose child is no longer going to come home for dinner, that her child's life mattered. It's acknowledging that we hear her, we ache with her, we weep with her, we acknowledge that the loss of her child's life is not okay, and that our nation is now less than because her child is no longer in it. I can only speak to my own experience, but to my white siblings, the only way that we can enter into this conversation is as listeners and as learners. We must admit that although we care and we grieve, we cannot ever fully comprehend because we don't have the same experiences of people of color in our country. We don't need to pretend that we do. We don't need to explain why somebody else should feel differently than they do, but to dismiss history as something that needs to be moved on from is something that we must not do. Because history is our foundation, and it continues to define who we are. You know, as a child, I loved sitting around and listening to the stories my parents and grandparents told about our family. My grandfather had this huge black chair, and he would pile all the grandkids in it and tell us stories about our grandparents and the founding of our country and about how our family tied into all of those things. And those stories still ring in my ears. I tell them to my own children, and I'm proud of those stories. But you know what? I didn't grow up hearing my grandfather talk about himself or his mother working as an underpaid maid in a middle-class white person's home. But I have listened to my own mother talk about her grandmother employing one. My history does not include stories of my direct relatives working as slaves. My family history goes back to the owners of those slaves. And those different histories mean that now, in 2020, we have very different starting points in life. I'm coming at our country's history from a very different perspective. I've been told the history from the perspective of the powerful, of the oppressor. And I don't believe that all my ancestors were horrible people. But what my misguided and even racist ancestors, my white ancestors, did in the past means that today, the mistreatment and inequality of people of color in this country hasn't gotten better like I would like to believe that it has. Because I'm hearing the story my white grandparents are sharing, inequality, though it doesn't seem as personal, as urgent, or as important to me as it should, even though I might want it to. But that does not mean that we stop trying to make change. That doesn't mean that we forget the sins of our ancestors. That does not mean that we forgo our responsibility to work for change. I am the worst at quickly forgetting each atrocity I hear about because the person who is no longer breathing is not my child. He is not my husband. She is not my friend. The city that is burning is not my own. I might say, my God, that is terrible. And I might rage and post and complain. And then I move on until it happens again. Or maybe I begin to listen to the voices that say that the loss of a building or property or fires in a city is more tragic than the precious loss of a life. It makes me uncomfortable to say that. It makes my pride protest. It brings out the fighter in me when somebody accuses me of that. But continually not seeking change in myself and in our institution makes us all passive participants and even perpetuators of a racist system that our white ancestors allowed to form this nation. It's privilege. It is my white privilege that allows me to put apathy and amnesia in the gaps between the killings of innocent Americans of color. It allows me to put blame on the innocent. And I have to ask myself, at what point will the killing of innocent people become so upsetting to me that I will actually do something about it? Will it take the death of my own child? One of the ugly roots of racism and prejudice and pride is fear. The fear that we at our core are not enough. That somehow allowing others the same privileges and opportunities that we have and even fighting for them, that somehow listening to other people's perspectives or even admitting that our ancestors were wrong or speaking up for someone will require us to give up something that we feel entitled to. That maybe there isn't enough to go around in this world and someone will take from us what we feel is rightfully ours, and that will somehow diminish us. So in order to fill this void that we have put out in ourselves, this less than-ness that we've created, that we've allowed to open up inside of us, we give in to filling it with these false narratives, these false stories that say somehow it was that person's fault, the way that they were treated. They must have done something to be in the situation that they're in. We begin to tell ourselves that we don't need to do anything about it because people maybe don't deserve the same rights as I do as a white American. Or maybe some arbitrary laws were violated. But at the same time, I expect leniency for myself and my children. Believing stories is easier than facing our own inner fear and calling it what it is. But we, Crosspointe, we are people of faith. We are followers of Christ, and our faith does not deal in fear. We have a faith that deals in possibilities. We have a faith that tells us that in the beginning, God created people and that they were good. We have a faith that tells us, for God so loved the world. We have a faith that says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And for too long, we have thought of our neighbors as people who look just like us and whose grandfathers told the same type of stories that ours did. And I love the definition of neighbor that theologian Gustav Gutierrez gives. And he uses the example of the Good Samaritan to give it. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and he says, the Good Samaritan saw an injustice. A man who had been beaten and was lying injured on the ground. And what did the Good Samaritan first do? He approached the man. He didn't ask whether the man deserved to be on the ground. He didn't ask if assisting that man would cost him something. He knew that it would. Gutierrez defined neighbor not as the person we already find in our paths, but rather he whose path we place in front of ourselves. He who I approach and actively seek. Ours is a faith that doesn't allow fear to define who we are. Ours is a faith that says we are all enough and that all people are our neighbors regardless of their income levels and pigmentation and neighborhood. Ours is a faith that follows a Christ who came to speak for the oppressed. Jesus, who in one of his most public and his first public messages was a declaration of mission on earth, of Christ's mission on earth. He went to a synagogue one morning. He was asked to read, and when he opened the scroll, he applied the ancient words to himself. And this one is from Luke chapter 4, verse 18. He read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free." And these are not just beautiful poetry. When you translate them from the Greek, the poor means those who don't have the resources they need. The blind are those who need freedom from opaqueness, who are not only physically, but can also be mentally blind. And the oppressed, that translation is those who have been broken, thrown down, crushed, or bruised. These are the people that Jesus came to speak for. These words described the neighbor then, and they describe the neighbor now. And Jesus didn't just preach a message and offer thoughts and prayers and then move on. Jesus gave us, the followers of himself, a call to follow his example. And the example that Jesus gives us is a problematic one. Christ gives us the example of the table. It's the call to bring the kingdom of God down to earth, the prayer to do on earth as is done in heaven. It is the call to include our neighbors at the banquet, the call to bring our neighbors to the table. And at first glance, this feast table that's covered in candles and it's all pass the butter and pour the wine. But when we look closer at the table, we realize that our table on earth is not level. Our table is like a wedding banquet where the important people sit up front and everybody else sits in the cheap seats. There is equality at God's table in heaven that is not yet found on our table on earth. So why are we still talking about this uncomfortable topic of racism? Because we believe that it's what Jesus would be talking about. We're talking about it because the table isn't level yet. We're talking about it because people are still dying, because children in our nation do not get the same education because of the color of their skin. People of color are not offered loans for homes and businesses or employed at the same rate as white Americans because of the color of their skin, because of the spelling of their names. We're talking about this because white Americans hold 10 times the wealth as Black Americans because of the systems we have allowed to become a deeply rooted part of our culture. Systems that my white ancestors and your white ancestors put into place. We're talking about these things because we believe that if Jesus were in the flesh in our century and in our country today, that's what he would be talking about. We believe that our faith says that if Jesus would be talking about it, that we should not only be talking about it, we should be doing something about it. Ours is a faith that doesn't define fear as who we are. Ours is a faith that follows Christ, who came to speak for the oppressed. Ours is a faith that calls us to action. Ours is a faith that moves us from what is actual to what is possible. Ours is a faith with bones of hope. Hope that we can make tomorrow different than it is today. Hope that we as people of faith can help change the trajectory of lives because of skin color. Hope that when we stand alongside the thrown down and the crushed and the bruised, that we can use our privilege to make a change. Ours is a hope that we can move towards a more level table. But white siblings, we have been the blind that Jesus came to give sight to. We have been unable to admit that our gods of comfortableness have continued to allow for the oppression and even the deaths of others. And in times like these, we want Comforter Jesus. We want peaceful Jesus. We want a Jesus who will tell us, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Everything is going to go back to normal. But white siblings, normal for our siblings of color isn't okay. And that needs to make us uncomfortable. We do not follow a Jesus who came to make us comfortable. We do follow a Jesus who called us into actionable hope and faith. Hope that holds a pickaxe that chips away at injustice until it is no longer there and the table is level. Our uncomfortableness must move us to what the biblical writer of James called faith with works. Faith in action. It should make us uncomfortable with where we are as individuals, as corporations, as a nation. It should make us uncomfortable with injustice wherever it is found. Our faith continually must be challenging us to grow and to move forward, even in the smallest of ways. Because just like bodies that sit still and don't move begin to atrophy, so does faith without action. The faith, the hope that we have, the hope that our faith offers us is a hope for change, a hope for possibilities, active hope that we're participants in. People of faith, we have the responsibility to be uncomfortable until the table is level. And so we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? There are so many things. And again, I can only speak as a white woman and from my personal experience. And I humbly request siblings of color, forgive us as we try to do what is right, as we inevitably make mistakes, as we inevitably harm more than we do good. Help us as we are trying to make change. There are so many ways to get involved. There are websites dedicated to ways that white people can take action. But we must start with ourselves. Few things that have helped me keep what I can do in perspective. First, it is myself that I begin with. I have to put aside pride and acknowledge my own bias. We all have them. Every single person, whether we like it or not. We have to begin to look for them. We have to be able to acknowledge them. We have to begin to change them. Secondly, we must become listeners and learners. We have to listen with the motive to understand and not correct. We can't white-splain everything. We have to educate ourselves on the history of racism in our nation. Our nation. This is our nation. This is our problem. There are websites and videos and books dedicated to this. Join our conversation that Crosspointe is having around the documentary Race, the Power of an Illusion. Rent it for yourself and watch it. And refuse to believe, even for a minute, that you are ever done learning. There is always more to know. Because when we begin to believe that we've learned all there is to learn, that's when the ugly starts to come back in. Third, if you see something, say something. Become an advocate where you are. If someone makes a racist comment, don't let it slide. If you see inequity in your workplace or in your school, say something and then offer to help make a change. As people of faith, we need to be the ones that bring humanity back to the narrative. Rather than allowing people to just lump everybody and everybody's story into one group, we need to be the ones that remind others that there are stories and families and lives behind each person. Every person of color does not have the same story and perspective. Lastly, we need to seek to make relationships with people who are unlike ourselves. Expand your neighborhood. Engage in conversations where you're able to listen to life experiences and perspectives that are unlike yours. And listen while you do this. Don't assign meaning to it. Just accept it as it's told. Devour it. Make it change you. Make sure that there are diverse voices at all the tables you sit at. If you want to do more, there's always more. Advocate, write your congressperson, listen to the bills being suggested as law. Ask hard questions about them. Don't just think that because they are coming from one party or another that they're going to be okay. Try to think forward into the future about who those things might affect. Figure out where your personal areas of influence are and begin there. But above all, do something. It is not enough for us just not to be racist. We must be actively anti-racist. Being anti-racist is a fight to level the table. Do something that helps begin to level the table. And remember that fear does not define us. Faith that follows the example of Christ does. And may we be people of faith who are defined by Christ and not by fear.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. You are speaking truth to power. You are laying down our swords, replanting every vineyard till a brand new wine is poured. Your peace will make us one. I've seen you in our home fires, burning with a quiet light. You are mothering and feeding in the wee hours of the night. Your gentle love is patient. You will never fade or tire. Your peace will make us one. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Your peace will make us one. In the beauty of the lilies, you were born across the sea. With glory in your bosom that is still transfiguring, dismantling our empires till each one of us is free. Your peace will make us one. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Your peace will make us one. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Your peace will make us one.
Welcome home.